Section 4.3, vertical and horizontal translations. So for the first example, they want us to graph sine of x plus pi over 2. So we always start off by setting the argument between 0 and pi over 2. 2 pi. Then this is the argument. It always goes between 0 and 2 pi for sine or cosine. And now we want to solve for x. So to solve for x, we can subtract pi over 2, subtract pi over 2, subtract pi over 2. And we end up with negative pi over 2 less than or equal to x, less than or equal to 3/2 pi. And that tells you where your graph starts. This is where it ends. And we already know the amplitude would be absolute value of a, which is 1, because there's coefficient here is 1. The period, there's two ways you can find the period. You can do this number minus this number, or you can do 2 pi over b, absolute value of b, I should say. Well, b is 1. This is b right here. The absolute value of 1 is 1, so it's just 2 pi over absolute value of 1, which is 2 pi. So the graph would look like this. We're going from negative pi over 2 to 3/2 pi. So you want to find 3 midpoints. The first midpoint, you add these two numbers and divide by 2. That's how you find the midpoint. So if you add these two, you're going to get 2 over 2 pi, which is just pi, and then divide that by 2, you get pi over 2. So that's your first midpoint. Then the next midpoint would be the midpoint between these two values, which is 0. That's the midpoint. So maybe I should scale this a little bit better. This would be about right there. So now it's scaled correctly. And then the midpoint between these two values is going to be, well, once again, you add them. If you add those, you're going to get 4 over 2, which is 2, and then divide that by 2 is 1. 1 pi is the midpoint. So once you have the midpoints, you know that sine starts at 0, and then if a is positive, then you go up first, and then back to 0, and then down to -1, and then back to 0. So that's exactly what's going to happen. You're going to start at 0, then you're going to go to 1, that's the amplitude. So you're going to go up to 1, then 0, then -1, then back to 0. And that's exactly what they wanted us to graph, from negative pi over 2 to 3/2 pi. So there it is. Example 2, same thing. We set the argument. Well, let's find the amplitude first. Amplitude is absolute value of a, which is absolute value of 4, which is 4. Period is 2 pi over absolute value of b, which is 2 pi over 2, which is pi. And then we set the argument between 0 and 2 pi. There's the argument. It's between 0 and 2 pi, and then we have to solve for x. Whoops, that should be a pi, not an x here. Okay, so first thing I would do is add 3/2 pi all the way through. So we're going to have 3/2 pi less than or equal to 2x less than or equal to, well, that's going to be, let's see, this is the same as 4 over 2. 4 over 2 plus 3 over 2 is 7 over 2. And then, yeah, so that's going to be 7 over 2. All right, so now we have, we got to divide everything by 2 to get x by itself. That's the same thing as multiplying by 1/2, by the way. If you divide by 2 is the same as multiplying by 1/2. So you have 3/4 pi on the left side, x in the middle, and 7/4 pi on the right side. This is what we're graphing, starting point, end point. All right, so let's draw the coordinate plane. All right, so 3/4 pi, I'm going to put that around here somewhere. And then 7/4 would be around here somewhere. All right, so the first midpoint, you add them, divide by 2. So if you add these two numbers, you're going to get 10 fourths. 10 fourths pi times a half, that's the same thing as divided by 2, is going to be 5 fourths pi. So that's our first midpoint. Then, if you notice, the midpoint between 3 fourths and 5 fourths is 4 fourths, because the midpoint between 3 and 5 is 4. So this is just going to be pi. And then the midpoint between 5 fourths and 7 fourths is 6 fourths. 6 fourths is 3 over 2. All right, and then cosine, since the amplitude is 4, we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, negative 4. Since the coefficient is positive 4 and it's cosine, that means you start at positive 4. If this had been a negative 4, you would have started at negative 4. So since it's positive, you're going to start up here. I'm going to go to 0, then negative 4, back to 0, and back to positive 4. There's your one complete period of cosine. And since they want it from 0 to 2 pi, that means you would have to go 1 extra fourth. So you would go to 8 fourths, which is 2 pi. 8 fourths, all right, 8 fourths would be about right there. And then you would go in the other direction. You would have to go, let's see, another quarter, and that would be pi over 2. Pi over 2. I'm sorry, pi over 4. And then finally 0. I think the best way to do this would just to be to plug in 8 fourths, which is 2 pi here. If you plug in 2 pi here, that's 4 pi. 4 pi, take away 3 halves pi. Let's see what that is. 4 pi, take away 3 halves pi, times 2, that's 8. Take away 3 is 5 halves pi. All right, so cosine of 5 halves pi, 5 halves pi cosine would be, well, that's 1 half, 2 half, 3 half. So 5 halves would be 1 half, 2 half, 3 halves, 4 halves, 5 halves. So cosine is 0. So that means you would be back at 0 here. And you could do the same thing in the other direction. Just plug in 0. If you plug in 0, negative 3 halves pi is going to be negative 1, negative 2, negative 3 halves. Cosine is 0, and so it's going to be back to 0 again. So it's going to be 0. There it is. All right, next example. So just in summary, there's also what they call a horizontal translation or a horizontal shift, and that's given by negative c over b. So here's your c and here's your b, but you have to remember to take the negative of that for both sine or cosine, and this is called the phase. Phase is just c. Phase horizontal shift would be negative c over b, and we already know that the period is 2 pi over b. All right, so for this example, I would first rewrite it so that it looks a little bit like negative 5 sine pi x plus pi over 4 plus 3. So I'm just moving the 3 to be in the back. It just looks a little bit better to me. So the amplitude is going to be, looks a little bit easier to work with. Absolute value of a, which is absolute value of negative 5, which is 5. Our period is going to be 2 pi over b, which in this case is 2 pi over pi, which is just 2. All right, and then our horizontal shift is going to be negative c over b, which is negative pi over 4 divided by pi. There's your c, and there's your b. And don't forget to take the negative of it. So the pi's are going to cancel. You're going to be left with negative pi fourths. Negative 1/4. Sorry, not pi fourths. Negative 1/4. All right, so now we have all the information that we need. So let's graph this. So this is 0. Let's see. We want to go to, where do we want to go? We want to start our graph. Oh, I forgot to set this part. We got to find we set our argument between 0 and 2 pi. So let's do that. All right, now we need to solve for x, so subtract pi over 4. So let's see, that's 8/4 pi. Take away 1/4 is 7/4 pi. All right, now we divide everything by pi, or multiply by 1 over pi. Oops. So on the left side, you should end up with -1/4. In the middle, you get x. And on the right, you get 7/4. All right, so we're going to start at -1/4. Go all the way to 7/4. So that's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's going to go up a little farther if you want to draw it to scale. All right, so let's find the first midpoint. So if you add these, you get 6/4. 6/4 times 1/2 is going to be 3/4. All right, let's find the midpoint between these two. If you add them, you get 2/4. 2/4 times 1/2 is 1/4. And then the midpoint between these two, if you add them, you get 10/4. 10/4 times 1/2. 10/4 times 1/2 is 5/4. Our amplitude is 5, so we're going to go all the way up to 5 and down to -5. And then this is sine. Sine always starts at 0. So our first point is going to be at 0. And then the question becomes, is it going to go up first, or is it going to go down first? Well, the coefficient is -5, so that means it's going to go down first. So that means at the next angle, it's going to go down first, back to 0, up to 5, and back to 0. So there's one complete period of our sine graph. However, we have to do a vertical shift 3 units up. So you have to take all these points and shift them up 3 units. So that is not the final answer. We still have to, we have to shift this up 3 units. So let's do that. This is the way I kind of like to do it. So if that's 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, so now that's going to go, the highest point is going to reach 8 because we're shifting up this point up 3 units. So 1, 2, 3. This point would go up to 3. So this point would go up to 3 because it shifts up 3 units. This point would go up to -2. And this point would go up to 3 as well. So there you have it. So I can erase this graph now. And there's our answer. There's our final sine graph. Let's move over to the homework now. Okay, let's start with this one. Identify the vertical translation of the equation. Well, the vertical translation is this number here. So that would be 7 units up. This one is a vertical translation going down 1/5 unit. All right, this one is going to shift up 4 units, but the negative in front of the sign means the sine wave is going to look like this. It's going to go down first and then back to 0. So that's what the negative does. It reflects it over the x-axis. All right, and then this shifts it up 4 units. So if you shift up, that can't be it. That can't be it. It's got to be one of these two, and we know that the graph goes down first because of the negative in front of sine. So it's got to be this one. And so this is a shifting up of 4 units. All right, this one's going to shift down 1 unit, and cosine starts at the coefficient positive 1/2. So we should start at positive 1/2, but then we're going to go down 1 unit. So if you start at positive 1/2 and go down 1 unit, you're actually going to be at negative 1/2 because you're translating it down. So normally your cosine graph would look like this. Y equals 1/2 cosine would be, normally it would start at a half and go, but because this is shifting down 1 unit, this is going to shift down. So now you're going to be at negative a half. And so your graph is going to look something like this. All right, so let's eliminate the choices that it cannot be. It cannot be this one. It cannot be this one. And it cannot be this one. So it has to be that one by default. All right, we know that the amplitude is positive a half because the absolute value of a half is a half. And the period is going to be 2 pi over b. 2 pi over b is 2/3 pi is your period. So that would be that one, 2 pi over 3. All right, and the vertical translation is down 1 unit. All right, this one's going to have a horizontal translation. So for the horizontal translation, remember it's the horizontal translation is negative c over b. Negative c is negative pi over b is 1 because the coefficient in front of x is 1. So it's just negative pi, which means left pi units. All right, the horizontal translation, same thing. Horizontal translation is given by this formula. So negative of negative c over b is 1. So it's just going to be negative 3/4 pi. I'm sorry, double negative because of this is 1 negative. And then the negative of this number. So these two negatives become positive, actually. So this is your horizontal shift to the right. All right, this is also going to be the horizontal shift is going to be negative c over b. So it's going to be negative pi over 6 over 1. Double negative becomes positive pi over 6. So you're going to shift to the right, not to the left. So this looks good. This looks bad. So this one's out. It's got to be between this one or this one. Since the coefficient is positive 1, that means it's going to go up first. If it would have been a negative 1, then you would have gone down. So it's got to be this one. All right, let's start with this one out. The period is given by 2 pi over b, which is 2 pi over 4, which is pi over 2. Horizontal shift is given by negative c over b, which is negative of negative pi over 4. Double negative is positive pi fourths. And then the phase, that's just c. So the phase is c, which is negative pi. Let's see, are we done? Nope, we got a couple more to go. All right, so for this one, let's see, the amplitude is the absolute value of 4, which is 4. The period is 2 pi over b, which is 2 pi over 4, which is going to be 8. The horizontal shift is negative c over b, which is negative pi fourths over pi fourths. Double negative becomes positive, and then these two numbers are the same, so that just becomes 1. And our phase is equal to c, which is negative pi over 4. All right, so let's see which ones we can eliminate from here. The shift is 1, so you have to start at 1, so this is good. This one's not good. This one's not good. So it's got to be between these two. And because it is a positive 4, that means we're going to go up first, not down first. So this is off. This one's got to be it.